Hello and welcome back to the Solo RolePlayers Podcast. I have with me today someone who unwittingly and unknowingly to her has been one of the most impactful people on my role-playing life. I would like to welcome to the show author of Mythic, Game Master Emulator 2E, among other things, Tana Pigeon. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited that you responded to my request for an interview like this. I didn't realize how big a deal Mythic was in this whole community until I started actually playing. It was the first thing that I saw recommended to me. It's the first thing I tried. I was amazed at how well it worked for me, from the get-go. And it was only then that I realized what a sort of following that it has. I just thought it was one of many of these emulators. But we'll get back to Mythic. The first thing I want to know about from you is I want to know, what was your journey into role-playing in the first place? Because I imagine there's some story there.
Oh, yeah, there is, of course. I like a lot of people, I discovered role-playing when I was a kid. And it was, love at first sight. I was an imaginative kid and lived in my head and loved board games and fairy tales and stories. So when I came across Dungeons and Dragons in my favorite bookstore, it was like, oh, what is this? And I had never heard of it before. So that's what got me started. And it just, wow, it was just such a magical, genius idea, this whole concept of role-playing games.
So you just saw the cover of a book and thought that looks cool. What is that?
Yeah, it was one of those early boxed editions of D&D with the red dragon on it and the cheapo dice inside with the crayon and all that. It was I'd never seen anything like it in my life.
So what was that like? You took this box home.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't really know what it was?
No, I mean, my brother's friends had gotten into Dungeons and Dragons, so I'd kind of peripherally heard about it a little bit, but I didn't really, I didn't really know anything about it. So it was the art that caught me at first. It's like, oh, fantasy. And then I look at the back and it's talking about role-playing games, and I have no idea what that is. And I'm probably like, I don't know, 10 years old, right? Mm. And so, yeah, I'm looking through the book, seeing, web spells and monsters and dragons, and I'm like, wow. It felt to me like I loved books and reading and writing. One of my favorite Christmas gifts was a typewriter, what I got so that I could write my own stories. And this to me felt like a living book, like a living narrative stepping into something. And so it was just so magical. That feeling has never left me. I just love role playing.
And what were those early years like? Did you have any friends of the same sort of age and you tried to work it out together, or a lot of it just reading yourself? Or what was those early years like?
Well, I had some friends that I played with, but it's I always liked, and this is going to sound weird, but even as a little kid, I liked spending weekends in my room with paper and pencil and making my own board games that I play by myself. I was very into solo playing back then, right? And they were very situational board games, like spaceships battling or bank heist running from the cops, or stuff like that. So they're kind of story driven. And so when I came across Dungeons and Dragons, my first thought was, ooh, this could help me make even better stories. And so I mostly played it by myself in my room and making tables and random tables to help randomize stuff. And I had notebooks. I'd spend entire weekends on the floor just writing out all these tables. So I was pretty antisocial even back then.
That is fascinating. That gives me a lot of encouragement. That's exactly what my son does. My son is 11 now, and mm-hmm. for years already, he loves sitting in his room. He loves drawing up grids, and whatever is going on in his head at the moment, he makes a game. So if he's reading a particular book series about people that, like, teenagers that turn into animals or whatever, he's building a grid and having like the character sheet that he can flip over, so they got their person side and their animal side, and the different abilities and all that sort of thing.
I so recognize that. I can tell you he's living in a magical world. He's loving it.
Yeah, it's great. And actually he's sort of starting to get into D&D as well. It's not actually something I've ever really played. Interestingly, I think I'm coming into this hobby from a bit of a unusual angle, perhaps. But I knew seeing him do this stuff, and I've always been role-playing game interested, and knew I wanted to get into it in some way, shape, or form. The little bit of D&D I played before moving to Germany now, which is about 5 years ago or something, I tried it and did it one short campaign. And I felt like I wanted to see what else was out there, Like I felt like it's like coming into Magic the Gathering late or something, I sort of felt like there's too much stuff here that I didn't come up with the changes of,
Right.
But for my son, he loves all of the granular details and all that stuff. So he's actually the one who knows all about D&D, and I ask him now when he has stuff like that. But one of the reasons that I started looking into solo play and cooperative play, and the reason I came across you, is because I wanted to be able to, do something with him, like whether it be GMing with him alone or a little bit of cooperative play or sort of some sort of combination of both, and to give him some tools to be able to do it solo as well. And accidentally, I started doing it a lot and really fell in love with it as a hobby and as something to do. And it quite literally has in some way changed my life this year.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
That's when I started. It actually has changed my life for the better. We'll come back to that because I want to know. I mean, my next question was going to be, how did Mythic get started? But I think we can already hear sort of that natural progression. You're sitting in your room, you are going through these adventures, you're writing stuff, you're creating narratives, you're creating tables.
Oh, yeah.
Could you, if you can remember, I mean, you were a kid, can you remember what sort of path of the actual tools that you started to come up with and started to build on top of each other? And how did Mythic form from that? I'm assuming it did.
It did. And I remember it in detail, and it's like, I could talk about this for a long time.
Excellent.
Do you want the short version or the full version?
No.
Oh, God.
I want to know everything. If you talk for 2 hours, I'll just edit it down, but at least I've heard it then,
Okay. Well, it goes like this. So I told you about like being in my room, again, like your child. It was the kind of thing as a kid, if I got punished and sent to my room, that was a reward. I was gonna be there anyway. So
yeah, we have that problem as parents.
So I was into making my own board games. I discovered Dungeons and Dragons, and then other role playing games and stuff. Making tables that help randomize things. I was also into like these computer text adventures, like Zork, right? I don't know if you remember that, but they were text-driven adventures and very free-form kind of things. And so that got me into computer programming. So I got like a VIC-20 and then a Commodore 64, which were ancient computers back then. I learned basic programming and started making my own text adventures. That got me interested in artificial intelligence. And when I say that, I have to qualify that because back then, that was a very different thing. That was just, that was like Zork and random words being thrown at you and stuff like that. Today, it's just like, I feel like I've transported into the future. It's a whole other thing.
So nowadays we would just call it computing, right?
Yeah. So the concept of the computer processing, like words, like it does in Zork. Like in Zork, you could type in any common language thing. Like I go down a corridor and it would figure it out, right? So that got me interested in the idea of like thought as a process that could be converted into rules, because that's basically all those early Zork games were. And I got into tarot card reading. I loved oracles like that. And in college, I was doing tarot card readings for everyone at the campus newspaper I worked for. By that time, I'm starting a psychology degree and learning about. I took a class on decision making and how people make decisions. And at the same time, I was also taking a class. I don't know, this is like rambling, but it all comes together. Trust me.
No, that's interesting.
I took a math class about probabilities, which was fascinating. And the professor boiled it down into a real practical thing. And I started doing this thing where I was using probabilities to make decisions through the day based on basic factors. Like I try to use it to basically to predict like what would happen, right? So this thing would have a 60% chance, or this thing would have a 75 or 95% chance. And it was like a game to me, but it was very cool. And I was still, very much into role-playing games and playing on my own. And I very much was trying to find the perfect system to play role-playing games by myself. And that the choose your own adventure style approach just didn't work for me. There just weren't enough choices. And I was still hammering away on all these like tables. Like I just figured if you had a table for everything, you could make any adventure. But then it was just so random, and there was no thought in it. And then I started to think, well, what if okay, so you got like the Zork style language parsing, and I'm thinking, and there's a process that people use to make decisions that I took classes on, and it's really it's knowable. It's very you can boil down the rules, and then I'm thinking probabilities really shape like what will happen, and that's also very easy to boil down into simple rules. And then the tarot cards, you can predict the future. You can predict like what you can do in a game that was very slow. So then it suddenly just clicked, and boom! I thought, you know what? That's where fake questions were born in Mythic. Yes/no questions to parse your thoughts and your decision making. The probability table was directly based on that probability thing that I would do. I just turned it into a table. And the meaning tables were basically tarot card meanings boiled down into single word tables to make it much faster. If you look at the earliest versions of Mythic, the meaning tables have a very kind of tarot-y feel to them a little bit. It's kind of, it was directly based on that. But that's basically where it came from. And then when I put all that together and started playing with it, I thought, okay, finally, this is it. This was the holy grail I've been looking for. And that was it.
You said that you were working for the newspaper while you were at college. Were you involved in writing as well?
Yes, I loved writing. I was a psychology and an English major, and my intention was really wanted to be an author. So getting involved in the newspaper as a writer was kind of a fun way of, it wasn't fiction writing, but it was writing. And so that really helped hone my ability to write and to produce like publications fairly quickly. And I learned my like graphic design skills there, and all stuff that I put into use later. So yeah, it's just a combination of all the things I love to do.
Yeah. And that's what a great thing that to put it all together, all the things that you love to do. And you saying that makes so much sense, because when you look at Mythic now, and this is something worth qualifying, I think, but because I came along quite late into this whole thing and into Mythic, and a lot of people are coming into it all the time. We see on the forums, on Reddit and whatnot, which is really fantastic. And Mythic gets brought up probably more than any other resource for people to get on board with. And especially, I think, with that second edition. When I came in, the second edition was the thing that was out. But that's reasonably new, reasonably recent, is it? Like in the last few years?
Yeah, that came out early last year.
Wow. I came in at a good time then.
Yeah.
What can you say to the evolution of Mythic? Like that first thing, I mean, clearly you had these tools for yourself.
Right.
You started to think, hey, this works. This is really great. This is what I've been looking for. Mm-hmm. What prompted you, and how did you first put it into a publishable form? And then B, what was that evolution like to get to what we have, which is Mythic now, which I assume is like what's the word I'm looking for? The definitive collection of the rules, right?
Yeah, that's really what I was hoping to do, and I think that's what it is. This is going to sound kind of weird, but like when I first cobbled together Mythic, it was loose sheets of paper that I made on my computer, all in a folder, and so those were my tables and charts and all this kind of stuff. And I played with that for like 5-6 years, through the late 90s, and I never thought I had no intention of actually publishing this. It was just for me. But after years of playing with it, and it gave me so much enjoyment. And I would look at my bookshelves of role-playing games, which I loved, and I'm thinking, wow, Mythic has given me access to all of these games. And I'm thinking, those books are all beautiful. And Mythic's just these loose sheets of sad paper in a manila folder. And I'm thinking, wow, it really deserves more respect. It deserves to be in a book on the shelf right next to all the others. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to make a single copy just for myself, one copy. And so I set to it. And I mean, that's why the original version looks a little rough, honestly. It's very conversational tone. I was writing it for myself. I had no money, so no resources. It was a passion project. It was purely because I thought Mythic deserved the respect, and it almost had become like a friend to me. It had given me so much enjoyment over the years. And so at the time I had heard it was brand new, this concept, print on demand, and by a company called Lulu. They were the only people doing it. I thought, oh, that's perfect. I don't need to spend a lot of money. I could buy one copy, copy $20 or something. And then, so I did that. And then I heard about this company online called RPG Now. They're selling PDFs to the role-playing community, very early days of that. And I thought, okay, I'll make a PDF of this, throw it out there, see if anyone else is interested. I really, no one's going to want this. Role-playing is a social activity. This is going to be perceived as so weird. But I thought, you know what? There's no harm. There's no cost to do it. So I tossed it up there. And then I never even checked I went 2 or 3 months and I didn't even check my account. I just figured it would just get lost in the shuffle. And I was very happy. I had my book. I put it on my shelf.
Yeah.
And I was like, mission accomplished.
That's it. Job done. Nothing else.
Basically. But then, months later, I checked my account. I see, wow, for the first month, I was right. 0 sales. And I got some hate mail too. Some people like, you're a sad little dork to be playing role-playing games. I got so much hate online.
Wow.
Yeah. But then suddenly I got this spike in sales. And I'm like, what the heck? And it continued, and I had no idea where it was coming from. And then I get contacted by this guy. He's like, hey, I belong to this forum of wargamers, and we love Mythic. And I'd never even thought about wargamers. And so apparently on the wargame, like tactical wargame boards, it was going wild. It was what they were looking for, right? And that really...
To run like AI of opposition movements or something like that.
Yeah. Apparently there were like a lot of wargamers who love their models, love their tables, have a hard time getting a group together, and we're using this to do tactical situations, and Mythic was running the other side. And that person who was kind of championing it made a fan page for me, which got me into the online community. And that really is where things started to take off. So it's interesting to me that wargamers are what really put the wind in the sails for Mythic. And then role players started to encounter it.
If I'm not mistaken, it was wargaming that kind of birthed D&D as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
right.
There's a nice little connection there.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
So what sort of year, like what sort of time are we talking about now where you just got it up and you just started seeing a little bit of buzz? How long ago was that now?
That was in 2003. And then by 2006, and this was the Red book, Mythic Roleplaying. By 2006, by 2005, it was really getting popular. And by then it was clear to me that, like the original Red book actually had 2 big ideas in it. It had the Solo RolePlaying, but also it had the original concept of Mythic Roleplaying was that it was this role-playing game that creates itself as you play, right? That idea didn't really take off, but the Solo emulator did.
So the emulator part of it was originally part of the RPG?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And that was popular enough where in 2006, I decided, you know what, I'm going to cut that out of it and make it a book on its own. And so that I put out the Game Master Emulator book in 2006, which all that really was just the original Mythic book with the other stuff cut out. So it was just the emulator part. So yeah, and I started supporting it more and getting involved with the online community. Those early days, we had a lot of back and forth. A lot of fans were making community-made stuff that was going on to our. We had this Yahoo group, which still exists. Well, the content on there still exists, so you can still find fan-made stuff back from 2006. And yeah, it just went from there, and made a few more books. I'd make a book maybe every couple of years.
Just adding little bits and pieces or different concepts?
Yeah, Mythic Variations 1, which added some new concepts, and Mythic Variations 2, which was kind of a redo of Mythic in a way to make it crunchier. Because ironically, back then, that was one of the criticisms of Mythic, that it was too simple. These days, Mythic is criticized for being too complicated. But I can't win,
Yeah.
right? So, and I kind of stuck to my friendly online groups, because I got maligned a lot. People just thought this was such a sad endeavor, like you have no friends if you.
Yeah. And of course, people, if you think that, of course, you have to reach out and tell the person rather than just not look at it. I mean, that I don't understand.
That's the
attempt,
internet,
you know.
but it's okay. You still see some of that today. It's not so bad, because now that it's widespread, it's like, okay.
So you've talked a lot about now the core elements of Mythic, right? The fate chart, the probability stuff. We haven't talked about the chaos factor, but that's built into the fate chart. What you haven't talked about, but what actually struck me. So okay, I just want to talk a little bit about my experience with Mythic, if you don't mind.
Oh, please.
Because it struck me twice so far, and I expect it may come up again, because I'm probably not using all of it just yet, and sort of have been building up to it as I go. I've got the Adventure Crafter as well, which I haven't looked at yet. We might talk about that later. But the first time it hit me was when I realized that the chaos factor was actually creating an ebb and flow of an impact on what was happening on the story. Like, to me, the original thing that attracted me to it is because, right or wrong, I don't like feeling like I know exactly the probability of something. You know, I sort of like, and same with board games or something as well, I like to think I have a pretty good idea, but I don't like mathing out everything exactly, That's
Right.
just me.
Right.
And so to me, I was initially attracted to it because I thought, okay, there's a lot of numbers there. That's good. That confuses my brain just enough so that I'm, not trying to narrow everything down. And the fact that those numbers change based on something else, that's good, because it means I feel like I'm in a little bit less control, or rather, the randomness is in a little bit less control. Mm-hmm. What I wasn't having fun doing was like flipping a coin. Does this happen? That was less interesting to me.
Right.
So that was the first thing that hit me about it, when I realized that this increasing or decreasing chaos factor, which, as we have talked about on the show before, but how if you're more or less in control, things get more or less chaotic. And I'm not sure if it's something I read elsewhere or something that you actually put in the book, but saying that is trying to be a representation of how a GM will give and take tension and excitement. Is that something that was in the book? Am I remembering that right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Very effective at doing that. So that was the first hit for me. And I realized that it's really clever how there becomes this natural arc of ups and downs, because the more likely the answer no is, the more likely you're going to be in control, depending on the way you're asking the questions, right? And it took me a little bit to get into the hang of that.
Sure.
What really blew me away then, which I was not expecting at all until I got into like the fourth session of what I was doing, and the story was starting to take form a little bit, is the way that character list throws the narrative back at you, and it throws things back at you that would happen in a well-written narrative, but without having to try and plan for it and sort of force it in. And that's where I found myself actually writing what feels like a cohesive narrative, which I haven't done before. I mean, I loved writing in high school. I didn't see any point in it much after that, apart from commercial stuff for work or whatever. always enjoyed it, but I didn't really see the point in writing if I was never going to actually publish a book. And that's when I said it changed my life a bit earlier. This is what I'm talking about, because I am now writing, and I feel like I am writing well, and I feel like I am enjoying my own stories in a way that I don't think I could do if I tried to sit down and write a novel, you know? And so that has just been the most eye-opening, freeing, creativity pulling thing for me recently, and that's fantastic. But that narrative aspect, I feel like gets talked about a lot less, at least when people are starting with Mythic. They may be just starting with the Fate table or something like that. But to me, that's the secret sauce, actually. And that's before I've even started getting into the thread stuff so much. But yeah, that's something. When did that narrative and the character list, where did that stuff start coming into it?
Well, that's all part of like this background, right? When I was finally hit upon this system for Mythic, I remembered that like back in my Zork days, right? Back in my computer programming when we were making these word parsing games. The problem with those is that they were very cold. It was entirely based on these logical rules, and you get used to it, and you can. It didn't feel warm and natural, and I knew that that Mythic, at the end of the day, is still a set of rules, and I did not want it to feel cold like that, and I wanted it to. I realized that when you play with people, as the game goes on, your attitudes and your opinions and your mood doesn't stay exactly the same. Your logical choices aren't frozen in amber; they change. Sometimes the game gets more exciting or less exciting, and sometimes those are choices. Like the GM will make, like, oh, okay, I need to tone things down a little bit, give the players a break. You go into a village, nothing happens. Okay, we need to amp it up here a little bit. A stranger comes by and he says, I have a map for sale. That kind of stuff. It ebbs and flows. It's not like just a constant, right? And so I needed Mythic to have something like that. It had all the logical elements. It had all the generation elements, all the prompt elements, but it needed something just to throw it off kilter a little bit. And that's where the chaos factor came from. I wanted it to be something very simple because I did not want it to be a distraction, but something very simple, very subtle, and that just tilts it a little bit so that it's like, like standing on the surface of like a ship at sea. It's never quite even. You never know what it's going to do, and so that throws you off a little bit. As you say, your own expectations. So suddenly, your own expectations, your decision on what you think the odds are and everything, you're never really quite right? And that makes sense because you know what you know, but there's a game world out there. There's lots of stuff you don't know, and even though in a procedurally generated game, those facts don't actually exist yet. It feels like they do, right? And then you discover them, and so that's what I wanted to get, was this feeling that there's a whole world out there that you're discovering as if it had already been created. It's a hard thing to describe in the rules. You have to experience it, like what you're saying. I could say in the rules what it does, but it's such a subtle thing that, and some people hate the chaos factor. Like, I don't want, and that's fine. If you, it's another thing with Mythic. I purposely made it extremely modular so that you can tinker with it as much as you want, because everyone's different. And Mythic as a system plugs into your brain, so it really is activating a lot in your brain that it really has to be modular because it has to map to everyone who plays it. So, but I'm glad you said what you said, because what you said about how the chaos factor kind of subverted your expectations a little bit was exactly what it was intended for.
Yeah. I think that's a really wonderful way to put it. You said you want to create that feeling like this world and story exists even though it doesn't yet.
Right.
And that is such a magical feeling, and I really think that you've, and like that's something that I really crave. I really love that feeling. I've talked about on a couple of shows before. I love having multiple books going at once because I like all the worlds existing out there somewhere, without necessarily knowing what's going to happen. So that was bringing in the chaos factor then. Was it at the same time or later that you started bringing in some of that character list stuff, or was that all tied in together?
That initially was just a necessity because you needed some way to manage this growing adventure. Um, so you couldn't just hold all these facts in your head. So the simplest way was just a list, and I'm kind of a list person anyway. So
Yeah, I've seen Mythic.
right, even my personal, everything's about lists because for me, I have things in my head, but I like to export, get them out of my head, put them in a list, clear my head. Now they're on the list, and move on with the thought. And so for me, that was like, a Mythic, that's perfect. List again. I wanted it to be very simple, and so just put it on a list. Something important, put it on a list, and then let's turn the list into a table. And of course, in early Mythic, it was very crude. It's just like make a list, find a dice that's close-ish, to the number of items, and it worked. But I like the way I do it in second edition more. It feels a little more gamified or something. It's cleaner.
Are you talking about which dice you choose to roll based on the length of the list?
Yes, right.
To me, the key element in that, which again I didn't realize until it happened, and there's this key point in my campaign which set the whole story off. Like one subtle addition, and I don't know if this was new to the second edition or not, and I'd love to hear from you, but the fact that you add a character again if they are relevant to the story. That is a seemingly minor thing, but in my experience so far at least, that has been massive because you're playing with the probability of them becoming more important in your story because they keep showing up.
Right.
And that has been really, really key to me. But because it's probability, you don't know, and so it's still exciting. You know, like I've had the experience in this campaign. I've had a particular character or a city or something show up and become quite prominent on the list, and I've still never rolled them. And so it's exciting every time. And that I think is just such a tiny little element of it that I wouldn't have thought had a big impact, but it really impacts the way that the narrative goes and coalesces and holds together, actually.
Yeah, that was another simple idea that was powerful, and it was not in the first edition. That came later. I published The Adventure Crafter in 2016, and to me, The Adventure Crafter is kind of like Mythic from an alternate dimension. It's the opposite of Mythic. If Mythic builds from details to the big picture, and Adventure Crafter is the opposite. It starts from the big picture and goes down to details. And Adventure Crafter also uses lists, and it used what I called weighted lists, which is this concept of adding more items. And I like that so much that I brought that idea over from the Adventure Crafter into second edition Mythic, because as you say, it's just so effective. About you get this list, you're starting to put together important elements. Okay, so that's step one. These are important. Now, which ones are the most important? Which ones are going to, like, a movie or a story is going to have a dozen characters, but there's always going to be 3 or 4 that are standouts, right? And so just allowing items to repeat up to 3 times was a simple way to get that across and let it happen organically. Let the adventure choose what's important.
Yeah. And so effective. Such a simple idea, so effective. It crafted my villain because he kept coming up on the chart, and he was in no way intended to be the villain of the entire adventure or campaign, and this character who was just a randomly rolled up character, just another NPC, the system turned him into the villain that I didn't know I needed.
Right. You didn't expect it.
The whole thing pivots off that now.
I love that. That's my favorite part of all this is I can go into an adventure with all kinds of ideas and all kinds of really set ideas. Like, I know how this is going to go. I know what I want. And then, boom, I like something happens that I completely didn't expect. That's fantastic. And I'm like, suddenly, I've been using this for a long time, and it still kind of mystifies me a little bit. Like, oh, wow. it's
That's
just
wonderful. That's wonderful to hear. We have lots of lifespan out of Mythic then if it's still surprising and exciting you.
yes.
Tell me, what does your play look like these days? Do you get to play much? What do you play? How do you play?
Um, you know, gosh, my play style has bounced all over the place over the years. This is something else I found that's interesting. Like I said that I made Mythic to be modular to fit individual players, but the thing is, individual players change over time too. Like the way I've used Mythic has I've maybe gone through a dozen different iterations about how I go about it. I've done detailed journaling. I've done pure theater of the mind. I've done Mythic as a writing tool. It's just these days I've gone back to I'm writing my Mythic adventures like they're books. Each scene is a chapter. I'm writing a long form, lots of detail. That was how I originally did it. It's very slow going, but it's very enjoyable because it eventually end up making a book at the end. And then I like, years later referring back to it, and I will have forgotten about moments, and then I'll read a section and like, oh yeah, I remember that. That was right. All those old feelings come back, right?
Yeah.
So writing it in long form like that it's almost like a way of storing the emotions you're feeling in written form, and then you reaccess those later if you want to reread it. So that's the way I'm playing these days, but I'll probably change again.
And are you writing long form at the time of making decisions, or are you coming back to it separately?
No, as I go, I'll be sitting there writing, and then I'll think, okay, I need to get a prompt for Mythic. So I have boom, what does this person do, or what happens here? Then I'll just basically keep writing, following my expectations until I feel like I need a prompt from Mythic.
And so, sorry if you said, but this is purely as a writing tool at this point, or is this tied to a game as well?
No, it's tied to a game. It's a role playing game, but it's like right now what I'm playing is since I'm working on the second edition of the Red book, Mythic Roleplaying, I'm playtesting that. So I'm playing that, and that's what I'm writing in long form. So, but I don't know. I do a lot of weird things. It's like a lot of times I'll roll dice to choose a random role-playing game from my shelf, right?
Excellent. Love it. Now you need to come up with a weighted shelving system so that you can shuffle things, maybe 2d6, and you could shuffle them more to the middle if you feel like you want to play them more. I don't know. I wanted to ask, so what if you're playtesting now for the second edition of the Mythic RPG?
Right.
What are we calling it? Is it
Mythic Roleplaying Second Edition?
Mythic Roleplaying Second Edition. I have that on my notes because I saw just the other day after we'd organized this interview, someone talking about it, saying, "Oh, hold off! I hear the second edition is coming." I do want to get to that. No pressure, by the way. I do want to get to that, but outside of playtesting for that, is there any standout games that you've been playing with Mythic?
Oh yeah. Over the years, probably my favorite role-playing game to solo is Call of Cthulhu. I love it. I love horror as a genre, and I've had so many great adventures in the Lovecraftian universe. I also love superhero games, and one of my favorites is the old TSR Marvel Superheroes game, which is these days it's known as the Phase Rip system, because a lot of it was popular enough that it spawned its own kind of subgenre, and that's because it's such a simple, lovely system. I also liked Mutants and Masterminds. I played a lot of that, and of course Dungeons and Dragons. And I like old school games, that a lot of forgotten TSR games like Gamma World and Top Secret. I had original version of Top Secret, which I have now lost, and I'm deeply sorry about that, because I loved that game back in the day. And then I've got, I just can't help it. I keep collecting role-playing games. I see one that looks beautiful, and I'll get it, and I probably will never play it, but I love reading about it. To me, role-playing books are just works of art, and not just the physical construction of it. But I love reading the rules. Like you're saying about your son getting into the details. It's fascinating to me, and like reading elegant rules to me is art in and of itself. So I just keep buying them because they're just so beautiful. And there's just so much good work being done out there.
I feel like that is a problem, or not a problem, that is a habit of a lot of the listeners here today, I'm sure, certainly me. And another reason why Mythic is so important, and so important to me, because I look at books on my shelf and I think I could actually play these now, you know?
Yeah.
Because I have this system. And that's why I found it originally. There was a particular RPG that I really wanted to play, the Fallout one.
Right.
And
Modifius.
Exactly. And I sort of got it, and I knew I'm never going to be able to play this really. And did a little bit with my son and thought, okay, well, this is kind of fun, but I also want to actually play as well. And played around with a little bit of play-by-post stuff, which was also pretty fun, but not the full experience and narrative that I was looking to do. And Mythic really unlocked that for me. And it's been such a great experience. I now feel a lot better about buying RPGs because even though I may never play them, like you, I love having them. I love the art of them and that feeling of potential that exists just knowing they're there. Like there's so much potential in this book, whatever it is, ideas, stories, characters, endings, heartbreak, disaster. It's all in there, just waiting to be had, you know?
Yeah, there's entire worlds between those covers, and to me, it's always felt like starting a game is like opening this portal into another universe, and it's discovery and exploration. You don't know what you're going to find, and it's infinite possibilities, and it's so very human, human experience, and it's just, you sound like a crazy person when you put it this way, but it is something magical, and you have to do it to really know what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something like one of the reasons I wanted to start this show was I was someone who was interested in solo RPG, didn't know how to get started, sought out content and advice and this sort of thing, and finally sat down and started, and I've never looked back, And so I really want, one of the reasons I want to talk to these creators like you and content creators who I've spoken to already and coming up in future episodes is to really encourage people just to do it, just to try, because you can't describe it. Yeah. It's really difficult to describe until you've actually experienced it,
Yeah.
Tell me then, if you, like the rest of us, have an awful lot of books on the shelf that you're not sure you'll ever get to, what's something that you're not playing but you'd really like to?
Oh, wow. Gosh, that's like every book on the shelf. I've probably played 20% of the games that I own. Now, okay, so here's something I do that helped me get past. This is the barrier, and this is one of the problems with solo roleplay. Since you are by yourself, you get a brand new book. You got to learn the whole system, right? And it's just you. You don't have other players that kind of are helping, right? And that could be daunting. I mean, we like our details. I don't know how many hobbies where people will get a 300-page book and they're excited about that much rule, right? Right.
The big manual for the lawnmower, right? I can't wait to read this.
Yeah, you show that to the uninitiated who aren't in role playing, and they're like, "Are you serious?" Yeah. But as a solo role player, it can be a little daunting. That you may want to stick to one system because you're familiar with it, and it's like, okay, I gotta take a week or two to understand this brand new book. So something I do, which it might be sacrilegious to some people, is I'll take a book, I know nothing about it, brand new book, haven't read it, maybe I've flipped through it, right, and I'll just start playing with it, and I'll let Mythic fill in for the rules I don't know, And each time I play, I might even pick random pages in the book and say, okay, we're going to make the scene about that. And then I pick up a little more and I pick up a little more. And I'll let Mythic and Fate questions fill in for rules that I don't know. And that way I can start playing right away without even reading the book, just I may only know what's on the cover and the back cover and have a gist for the genre, and I'll just jump in. And I might even put the book on. I might even list it on the characters list.
Ooh, that's an idea.
One of the books, like Scion, which is White Wolf game about you're a demigod basically. So maybe I don't know how to play it at all, but okay, I know the gist. I'll put that on my characters list. If it gets pinged by a random event, I'll use the book as if it were a table.
Ooh.
And I'll roll 1 die 100, go to that page. Whatever's on that page is the thing. It is part of this event. And that way, content from the game, from the book filters into my game. I learn about it. And treating a book like a table is a natural thing, because if something is important in a game, it will get more space in the book, right? So it's automatically weighted. And I'll mark that page, 1 die 100, mark that page. And then when if I ping in again, I roll another 1 die 100, and I just move on from there. And if I get to the end of the book, I just wrap around. And so it's great. It's a way to learn a game and play right away without having spent any time reading it at first.
This is wonderful. This ties into an idea. And I'm realizing now as you talk, it's sort of all the stuff I'm reading and collecting in my head is sort of merging in my brain a little bit. And I'm not sure how much you talked about this. Did you talk about this exact thing in Mythic or not really?
I have. I've mentioned it more in the magazines. I think I did include that in second edition as like an idea,
Okay. So I'm not sure if it's that or from Mythic or a combination of Geek Gamers,
yes,
Solo RolePlayers, Solo Game Master's Guide. But that is part of this idea that I'm forming to do some one-shot actual plays on this podcast as well, where I do exactly that. And I sort of experimented it with the other day, which I'm not going to get into now because that's off onto a whole tangent. We will talk about that in the future on this show. I want to ask you, I'm conscious of time. Tell us a little bit about the second edition of Mythic Roleplaying.
Okay.
What can we expect?
All right.
Is it on track? Are we going to see it?
Yeah, it's moving slowly. I had to admit that when I made second edition of Game Master Emulator, the year leading up to that, I put a lot of work into it. Evenings, weekends, all my free time. I was really driven to get it done because I really wanted to get it done, but it was really exhausting too. So I'm have a more balanced workflow these days. I want to enjoy it. I don't want to feel. You have to enjoy it. It's important for the product too. It's like
it needs the love and the soul in it.
Exactly. So I've accepted that I'm a slow game designer, and I think that's okay.
Yeah, that's music to my ears. Thank you.
Yeah,
that gives me permission.
I love what I do, and I love making it, and I want to keep that love, and I think that love seeps into it and is felt by people who use it. So it is taking me a while, and it is. But it's originally when I first made Mythic back in 2003, Mythic Roleplaying came out first, and then Game Master Emulator was derived from that. Today, it's the opposite. Game Master Emulator second edition came out first. Mythic Roleplaying will be derived from that. So I'll be using, it's basically taking the Game Master Emulator second edition Game Master rules, simplifying them a little bit, and adding a full role-playing game to it. So it could be perceived as a companion to Game Master Emulator, or as a standalone book. Like if you got the role-playing game second edition first, you've got the emulator. You might still want to get the emulator book if you want more of that. And it could go the other way. If you get the emulator book, you might be happy, but if you want a role-playing game, that's that. So I'm kind of seeing them as companion books, although each book stands on its own.
Is it wildly different from your original concept of the role-playing part of it?
No. And in fact, I'm trying once again to breathe life into that second of the two big ideas that the original book had. Again, the original book was meant to be solo role-playing and a universal game that builds itself. And I mean, the actual rules build itself too, not just the content. And so I feel like I didn't present that very well back in 2003. And this time I'm taking a better shot at it. And it's literally the whole idea is that just like in Mythic, how you can sit down in an adventure and know nothing and then start producing an adventure. Mythic role-playing will be the same thing where you sit down, you want to play a game, but you know nothing about the game. You have no character. You don't know the setting. You know nothing. And it will procedurally start building the game from there. Not just the adventure, but the entire world and the tone and even like important rules. So it takes the concept of Mythic of generating an adventure and takes a step back and okay, let's not just procedurally generate the adventure. Let's procedurally regenerate, generate everything. So it's
fascinating.
Yeah, it starts with creating the setting, which could be anything, special rules. Then you get to your character, which kind of slots into this setting and is influenced by it. You're creating a history for the setting. So now you got some details and lore. This is all before you even start playing. And then, you just see where it goes from there.
That's really fascinating. So your original idea stands,
yes,
but now you have all this extra experience. It's funny that the thing that was the offshoot of that is now influencing the original idea.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful little circle to close.
It is, right? We'll see if it works this time. I feel like I failed the first time around, but we'll see how it goes this time.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've really, really enjoyed this. It's been inspirational, and I really can't recommend enough. I mean, it's not necessarily the answer to the way you want to play, but you won't know unless you try it.
Right.
And it, like you say, having that modular system, if you don't like the chaos factor, there's alternative alternative fate charts in there as well. Pick and choose what you want, and I think it's an absolute must try if you want to get into solo role playing, especially if you want to play a big normal RPG that wasn't built exactly for solo. Thank you so much. Do you have a release date, or there's too much pressure for?
Oh, I'm
edition?
so bad at making. I never give release dates just because I'm so bad about meeting it. I'm hoping to have it finished in about 6 months.
Okay, so it's not years away, probably.
No, I was hoping to have
Game of Thrones. Situation.
It's moving along.
Excellent.
Thank you, Phil. I really enjoyed this.